On the industrial platform, 10,000 feet above the toxic cloud layer, the allocated solar time for the primary shift was minutes from expiry. David moved with the frantic efficiency of a man whose life clock was on a visible countdown. His arms, thick with synthetic fibers, strained against the heavy power coupling he struggled to secure. The sweat on his brow was not from heat but from the systemic, perpetual anxiety that defined life. He glanced at the wrist display embedded in his regulation jumpsuit. The number, stark red against the gray metal, read, quota, below critical threshold. He required an immediate production yield to clear the minimum for the day. Falling below the mandated quota did not result in a warning. It resulted in a biological system shutdown. The implant, placed at the base of the skull, was the ultimate compliance mechanism. Zero quota meant zero function. The coupling clicked into place. The main power conduit thrummed. David's quota counter barely advanced. He had secured the primary coupling, a task worth significant units, but the system registered only a negligible fraction of the effort completed after the last measurement interval. He was desperately short. He had less than 8 minutes. Producing the required units in that time frame was mathematically improbable, even for a high-efficiency specialist. He was already operating at maximum capacity. The only remaining tasks were tertiary circuit checks, precision work, not speed. A low, resonant chime sounded in his helmet. The automated unit oversight had delivered an instruction. David grabbed the diagnostic kit. The procedure required descending the access ladder to the external relay box, which was exposed to the high-velocity wind shear at the platform's edge. He began the descent, his magnetic boots gripping the rungs. His focus, despite the physical danger, remained on Elara and Iris. They were kilometers away, safe within the habitat sector, yet their survival was entirely dependent on his output. His individual quota determined the shared life balance of the domestic unit. If he failed to meet his minimum, the deficit would be immediately withdrawn from the family's fragile reserve. They had a small cushion, saved through weeks of meticulous effort. A deduction now would shatter that margin, forcing them into a state of terminal risk. His drive was not self-preservation, it was the simple, visceral requirement to maintain the family's life balance above the threshold. This was his anchor. He reached the relay box. The wind was a physical force against his body. He opened the panel. The issue was identifying a microfracture in a hyperconducting sheath. It demanded absolute stillness and focus, qualities his impending deadline threatened to steal. He brought the optic sensor probe to the first circuit. The display flashed, quota level, dangerous. Time remaining, less than 6 minutes. The quota was only rising through the passive allocation for effort expended, a trickle designed to maintain base function, but not safety. A small tremor ran through the platform. Geological, not mechanical. The cloud layer below roiled violently. A secondary alert appeared, critical warning. Structural integrity compromised. Minor deformation detected. All personnel adjust priorities. A greater crisis had emerged. Structural failure meant potential collapse, adding the threat of physical death to the certainty of systemic shutdown. David ignored the new protocols, he focused solely on the sheath. His diagnostic screen showed the nearly invisible fractures. He had to apply the sealant with millimeter precision to the rupture points. 3 minutes passed. He sealed the first sections. His quota nudged upward but was still critically short of the minimum. The final rupture required opening a junction box, a manual process the system did not account for. He had to improvise, increasing the risk of an electrical discharge. Quota level, red. Time remaining, 90 seconds. He had to move faster. He grabbed the small laser scalpel, overriding the safety sequence. He sliced through the polymer casing instead of using the designated separation tool. It was faster, but introduced the risk of damaging the conductor, which would trigger a catastrophic task failure and immediately zero the family's life balance. 45 seconds later. The casing was open, the fracture exposed. He applied the polymer sealant with a rush of focused desperation. Quota level, unmoved. Time remaining, 60 seconds. The junction was reassembled but unsecured. The system required structural verification before releasing the quota points. He needed a heavy-duty crimping tool. His kit contained only the light-duty version, rated for significantly less force than required. The correct tool was on the main platform, many feet above. He began the agonizing compression with the light tool, gambling that its material would hold. The metal protested with a high-pitched whine. The display flashed a severe notification: error. Structural mismatch. Abort crimping. He ignored it. Aborting meant immediate failure. He pushed harder. 30 seconds left. The crimp was nearly finished. Quota level, on the critical threshold. Time remaining, 45 seconds. The tool snapped. A fragment of metal struck his helmet. His vision blurred, and his magnetic grip momentarily failed. He hung suspended by one hand. The junction was almost sealed. The system, oblivious, initiated the final countdown. Quota level, dangerous. Time remaining, 30 seconds. He needed a final push. He slammed the palm of his good hand against the housing, forcing the slightly misaligned crimp to seat. The pain was irrelevant. A sharp, clear chime sounded. The task was verified. Quota update, danger averted. Threshold cleared. He had survived. The quota was secured. Time remaining, 20 seconds. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The immediate survival objective was met. But the system was not finished. The warning he had ignored, the critical structural integrity alert, now escalated. Imminent catastrophe alert. Reactor core stabilizer offline. Core meltdown imminent. The larger crisis had materialized. The minor structural deformation had severed the stabilizer line. He had fixed his personal micro-problem only to allow a systemic macro-problem to take root. He was safe from shutdown only to face vaporization. He was trapped many feet below the main deck, with a damaged hand and a reactor countdown running. The system had replaced one certain death with another, larger threat. He knew the only way to engage the manual override was from the central console on the main platform. But the platform was already under a forced evacuation protocol. Evacuation protocol initiated. All personnel proceed to skydock. Failure to comply will result in immobilization. Immobilization meant the system would lock his joints and transport him, prioritizing his organic material over the task at hand. He had to reach the console before the lockdown was complete. He scrambled up the ladder. His damaged hand protested. He reached the main deck just as the automated security barriers began to drop, sealing the control room. Barrier closure, 45 seconds. He dashed across the platform, scraping through the narrow gap just before the barrier locked with a hydraulic hiss. He was in the control room. Alone. The override console glowed red. He pressed the designated button. Nothing happened. A secondary message appeared: sequence requires authorization, unit oversight level 4. He was a level 3 specialist. He lacked the necessary clearance. The system, in its cold logic, was preventing the only person present from saving the structure due to an arbitrary security restriction. The crisis had escalated again. He could not input the code. He had to bypass the system physically. Bypassing the system meant accessing the main server node deep inside the fortified vault. The vault required a rapidly fluctuating thermal signature to disengage its lock. He ran to the vault door. The core meltdown timer blazed on the wall, less than 10 minutes. His personal quota was dropping. The units were draining due to the system-wide power draw for the containment protocol. He pulled his small, non-compliant interface tool from his belt. He inserted the tool into the vault's control port. The thermal lock demanded a complex digital key, generated live based on environmental data. He began the input, gambling his family's safety on computational speed. 60 seconds later. He had the key. The heavy lock retracted. The door hissed open. Quota level, falling. Meltdown time, 8 minutes. He entered the vault. The server node, a humming structure of circuits and cooling liquid, loomed. To bypass the authorization, he had to reroute the primary control loop through an external port. He reached the port. It was sealed with a tamper-proof locking plate. Removing the plate required a specialized electromagnetic pulse generator, a tool he did not possess. The final crisis was reduced to a single physical barrier. He looked at the thick plate. Impossible to force open. He remembered the fragment of metal from the crimping tool, still lodged in his glove. The unstable alloy, when rapidly heated, would expand exponentially, acting as a small charge. He jammed the metal fragment into the microscopic gap beneath the plate. He set the laser scalpel to maximum power and pressed the stud. The metal fragment glowed white-hot. A tiny, controlled breach occurred. The plate warped and the securing bolts snapped. David pulled the plate free. The bypass port was open. He connected his interface tool. The code flashed, manual override active. He initiated the sequence. The control room monitor shifted from angry red to stable blue. The siren stopped. Reactor core stabilized. Meltdown averted. David sagged against the node. Quota level, secure. Meltdown, averted. He had won. He had saved the platform and maintained his family's life balance. Then, the final, subtle escalation. A new message, small and discreet, appeared on his display, a communication from the central authority. New protocol adoption, family unit efficiency revision. Rule modified. Domestic life balance threshold increased by 25%. Effective immediately. The family's reserve, which he had just nearly died to protect, was instantly rendered insufficient. His current personal surplus was negligible. The system had moved the goalposts. His immediate safety was replaced by the desperate, immediate need to generate a significant additional surplus just to keep his family above the new threshold. He had no official work remaining. The system categorized him as task complete/awaiting transport. He looked out the window. The evacuation drone was visible, approaching rapidly. He had a window of approximately 3 minutes before the drone engaged the immobilization sequence. He needed an unscheduled task. He scanned the control room interface. The only remaining active task was a remote calibration sequence for the atmospheric regulators on the cloud layer maintenance vessel, CLMV, docked 50 feet below. It was a specialist task, worth small but critical units. He had to get to the vessel, complete the task, and return, all before the automated drone locked him down. David moved toward the emergency access hatch. The hatch was, predictably, sealed by the evacuation protocol. Lockdown active. Authorization required, evacuation support level. He pulled out the non-compliant interface device. He had to hack the security relay directly while the system was on high alert. Drone arrival, 2 minutes, 10 seconds. He inputted the complex key. 30 seconds later. The hatch lock disengaged. He secured the lock manually, preventing the system from re-engaging the seal. He dropped onto the catwalk, descending toward the docked CLMV. He was operating outside the designated safe zone. Safety violation detected. Quota deduction. Quota level, slightly reduced. Drone arrival, 90 seconds. The system immediately penalized the risk, keeping the pressure unyielding. He reached the hull of the CLMV. The calibration arrays were on the aft stabilizer fin, a narrow, slick walkway. He had 90 seconds. He had to complete 3 precision alignments, worth just enough to clear the new family threshold, and evade the drone. He reached the first array. The alignment required adjusting a micrometer screw using a delicate, vibrating tool. The alignment was only successful if his physical stability matched the vessel's engine harmonics. He began the alignment. The tool whined. Drone arrival, 60 seconds. He finished the first array. Verified. Units added. Quota level, clear of new threshold. Drone arrival, 40 seconds. He had crossed the threshold. He was technically safe. But the margin was too thin. One systemic deduction, one accidental slip, and he would be back below the minimum. He sprinted to the second array. 40 seconds to create an undeniable cushion. The second array was blasted by the searing heat of the vessel's auxiliary power exhaust. He worked through the pain. Drone arrival, 25 seconds. He finished the second array. Verified. Units added. Quota level, secure cushion. Drone arrival, 15 seconds. He needed the third array. The cushion was everything. It was the only way to buy his family a day of real safety. He reached the final array. 10 seconds. He slammed the final calibration disc into place. The drone's shadow fell over the CLMV. The low hum of its gravity stabilizers vibrated through the hull. Drone arrival, 5 seconds. The system registered the input. Verified. Units added. Quota level, significant cushion. Drone arrival, 0 seconds. The drone was upon him. The metallic arms extended, locking onto his shoulders and legs. He had a significant surplus. He was safe. But as the drone's arms locked, an electrical surge, a feedback loop from the newly calibrated array, pulsed through the CLMV's hull. Critical malfunction. Vessel power overload. System recalculation initiated. The system, in its final, brutal move, questioned the validity of the work done during the electrical surge. The completed task was instantly suspended. Task validation, pending. David was locked in the drone's grip, immobile. The surplus he had fought for was instantly revoked, his quota reverting to the pre-task value. Quota level, barely above minimum. Life balance cushion, fragile. The system had introduced a state of total, absolute vulnerability, one David could only watch unfold, immobilized. His immediate life was secured, but the safety of his family had been placed on a knife edge, awaiting a single, unpredictable validation decision. The pressure was absolute. The drone began its slow, deliberate ascent, carrying a man whose body was safe, but whose life, and the lives of his family, had just entered the final, most terrifying phase of zero-sum existence. The drone ascended, its metallic arms clamped around David, lifting him clear of the cloud layer maintenance vessel. He was powerless, his body secured by automated protocol. Below him, the vessel was silent, its task validation suspended. Task validation, pending. His entire buffer, his family's only safety margin, now hung on a digital thread that he was transported not to the skydock, but to a temporary holding bay designated for personnel who had violated safety zones. The air was colder here. As the drone released him, he found himself facing a single, blank, mirrored panel. The central authority spoke through the panel, its voice synthesized, perfectly neutral. Unauthorized personnel movement detected. Failure to comply with evacuation protocol registered. Deduction applied. David's display flashed. Quota deduction, NON compliance. Life balance, barely above minimum. The system had acted on the non-compliance first, not the successful reactor stabilization. The small deduction immediately put the family's balance back into critical territory. The very act of saving the platform had directly endangered his family. The structural integrity task remains under validation, the voice continued. Should the output fail verification, the accumulated deficit will be applied to the domestic life balance. David had to act. He had seconds before the holding bay doors opened and he was escorted to mandatory rest, effectively sealing his fate until the next shift that he located the bay's emergency ventilation conduit, a narrow, unsecured passage leading to the external hull service tunnel. It was a confined space, nearly impossible to navigate with his damaged hand. But the service tunnel led directly toward the central network junction point he needed to reach. He used the non-compliant interface tool to short the electrical panel controlling the ventilation grate. Sparks erupted, a clear violation, but he was already moving. He yanked the grate aside and squeezed into the conduit. The space was tight and dark. He could feel the cold metal pressing against his damaged forearm. His quota was static now, but the internal clock was the drone's return. He wormed his way through the conduit. He knew this service tunnel was used for non-critical repairs and had a single data access port. If he could reach that port, he could force the validation of the CLMV task. The risk was enormous. Any manipulation of the validation matrix would be a high-level security breach, punishable by permanent life balance reduction, a fate worse than a single deduction that he reached the port. It was locked with a bioscanner, requiring a specific unit oversight level 4 authorization. He did not have the clearance. He used the interface tool to simulate the level 4 biometric pulse. The tool strained, its small indicator light flickering violently. He gained access. The screen displayed the validation queue. His task, the CLMV array calibration, was at the top. The status, pending review. Wait time, 14 hours. 14 hours. His family's balance would be depleted by passive consumption within 2 hours. They did not have 14 hours. David bypassed the queue, forcing the system to run the verification instantly. He watched the screen. The validation process was a rapid sequence of checks: alignment, thermal stability, power output. The verification ran. Alignment, pass. Thermal stability, pass. Then, the final check. Power output rupture detected. Validation, failed. The surge he felt as the drone clamped him, the electrical feedback loop, had indeed caused a power rupture. The system was technically correct. The $0.30 units he had earned were nullified. The deduction was instantly applied. David's display went blank for a moment, then screamed a new status. Domestic life balance, below minimum threshold. The crisis had moved from a potential threat to an immediate, existential certainty. His family was now marked. He had less than 2 hours before the systemic resource restriction protocols would kick in, reducing their air quality and nutrition supply to a point that would compromise the child, Iris. His emotional anchor, the survival of his family, had been cut loose. He felt a moment of pure, blinding panic, instantly suppressed by conditioning. He had to pivot. He could not fix the validation failure. He had to generate new units, immediately, inside this sealed, task-free sector. He searched the control screen. He saw an obscure maintenance alert for a localized atmospheric filtration unit, tucked away in the deepest sublevel of the platform, a location designated no entry during evacuation protocols. The task was small, complex, and high risk. It was worth a marginal amount, but enough to push the family balance back above the threshold for 1 more hour. He scrambled back out of the conduit. He had to find a physical way to the sublevel. He found an emergency ladder leading down, secured by a magnetic lock. He overrode the lock and began the descent. The air grew immediately thicker, carrying the metallic tang of unrefined coolant. The filtration unit was located in a narrow crawlspace. He entered the space. The unit was humming erratically. To fix it, he needed to replace the primary filter cell. The cell was heavy, requiring both hands and specialized lifting equipment he did not have. He pulled the large, heavy filter cell from its housing. His damaged hand screamed. The effort caused a violent, uncontrolled physical reaction, a surge of pain and muscle tremor. The system, registering the anomalous physical activity, immediately classified it. Anomaly detected. Immediate inquiry initiated. David was now facing not only the clock and the quota but an active systemic inquiry into his physical state, a precursor to mandatory immobilization and full diagnostic review, which would seal his family's fate that he forced the new filter cell into the housing. It was a struggle of pure will against physics. 30 seconds of gritting effort. The cell locked into place, the panel flashed, task complete. Units added. Domestic life balance, barely above minimum. He had bought them a moment, less than an hour. He was still in the no-entry zone, and the inquiry was active. He had to leave the zone, but he could not simply climb out. The inquiry would flag his exit. He needed a distraction. He spotted a decommissioned thermal vent, running directly from the sublevel to the platform's external surface. The vent was fused shut. Using his tools, he could force the seals to rupture. This would create a temporary, non-critical thermal breach, a distraction that would redirect the system's inquiry protocol from his location to the physical rupture point. He used the laser scalpel to cut the magnetic seals. The process was slow. System inquiry, location ping initiated. He had 20 seconds before the inquiry pinpointed his location. If detected, the full lockdown would engage. He severed the final seal. The vent buckled, releasing a surge of hot, humid air onto the platform's surface above. The system responded instantly. Thermal breach detected. Priority shift. Containment protocol, the inquiry was diverted. David scrambled back up the ladder. He had gained a few precious minutes. He emerged onto the main deck. The area was clear. The evacuation was complete. He was the only organic unit remaining. He had to get to the skydock. Not for evacuation, but for an opportunity. The docking station was the primary hub for unscheduled deliveries, which often required manual signing, a small task worth minimal units. He sprinted towards the dock. His wrist display glowed. Domestic life balance, critical. Units deduction imminent. He reached the skydock. No ships were docked. The area was deserted. No manual signing task was available. Then he saw it, the emergency supply canister. It was sitting unsecured near the automated loading port. The protocol required all unsecured materials to be manually locked down and tagged for inventory, a task worth a tiny amount of quota, but enough to buy his family another 20 minutes of secure life balance. He rushed to the canister, attached the non-compliant interface tool, and began the lock and tag procedure. As he finished, the central authority chime sounded again, this time directly through the skydock's external speakers. David. Your presence is unauthorized. Final immobilization sequence initiated. The drone he had evaded moments ago was returning, this time with a full-spectrum immobilization mandate. Drone arrival, 60 seconds. He had his tiny buffer. He had to leave the dock, but the drone would intercept him instantly. He saw the escape route, the freight elevator. It was decommissioned, its cables severed decades ago. But the heavy counterweight for the freight elevator was still intact, suspended high above the shaft. David climbed onto the elevator roof. He looked up at the massive counterweight. If he could dislodge the weight, the resulting collapse would create an energy surge, a massive, localized structural anomaly that would disrupt the drone's guidance system for a critical few seconds. The drone was visible, approaching the docking bay. 40 seconds. He focused the laser scalpel on the structural pin holding the counterweight. The pin was thick, designed to withstand centuries of tension. The scalpel struggled to cut through the hardened alloy. Drone arrival, 20 seconds. The drone entered the docking bay. Its metallic arms extended, seeking him out. He increased the scalpel's power to maximum, risking a thermal feedback loop that would severely burn his hand. He ignored the searing pain. The pin snapped with a tremendous crack. The massive counterweight plunged down the shaft, generating an earth-shattering reverberation. The air screamed. The sudden structural anomaly completely blinded the drone. It veered wildly, its arms retracting as its guidance system failed. David jumped from the elevator roof just as the drone smashed into the control tower, its components scattering in a shower of sparks and plastic. He had won a physical battle against the system's execution mechanism. He had 30 seconds of absolute, uncontrolled freedom before a new drone was dispatched. His wrist display flashed one final, terrifying message. CLMV validation review complete. Power output failure confirmed. Final deduction applied. Domestic life balance, 0. The system, in its cold efficiency, had waited until he was immobilized or eliminated to finalize the deduction. The delay was not mercy, but protocol. He had fought, cheated, and risked his life countless times, only to watch the balance turn to zero. His wife, Elara, and his child, Iris, were now subject to the immediate, non-negotiable shutdown protocols. He could see the habitat sector far in the distance, a massive, sterile cylinder of false safety. David's body was free. But his family's time had run out. He was alone, on a decommissioned platform, with nothing but the vast, toxic clouds below, and the system's final, absolute victory above. The counterweight's impact had severed a communications antenna. A momentary, desperate window of opportunity appeared. He had one chance to send a final signal, a non-compliant override pulse, a futile act of defiance against the inevitable. He turned, not toward escape, but toward the exposed antenna spire. David's body was free. His family's life balance was zero. The technical victory was a devastating personal loss. The system had won. He faced the broken antenna spire, a jagged metal finger pointing at the toxic sky. This was his last moment of agency. He accessed the non-compliant interface tool. The drone he destroyed had scattered enough residual energy to power a temporary, localized signal burst. He needed to channel that energy through the exposed spire and upload a final, corrupting pulse. The goal was no longer survival, or even rescue. The goal was to leave a signature, a piece of non-compliant data in the system's massive, clean memory, a virus of defiance that proved a single, motivated human existed outside the quota. He began the physical work, splicing the delicate fiber optic lines of the antenna into the heavy power conduit scattered by the explosion. His damaged hand was useless, so he worked with his teeth and his one good hand, the pain from his trauma a distant, dull background noise compared to the silent screams of his family's impending shutdown. Central Authority notification, new drone deployment. Arrival, 3 minutes. 3 minutes. He had less than 180 seconds to perform a highly complex, improvised data bypass. He secured the final conduit with a desperate knot of thick cable. The connection was unstable, sparking with raw power. He connected his interface tool, aiming to upload the single, unique data sequence he had carried in his tool's secure buffer since his non-compliant modifications began years ago. It was a digital fingerprint. He hit the upload command. Upload initiated. Stability, critical. The broken spire began to glow, heating the metal rapidly. David watched his wrist display. The system, recognizing the unauthorized, high-level data stream, reacted violently. System integrity alert. Immediate blackout protocol initiated. The platform went dark. All lights failed. The persistent hum of the residual power grid died. The only illumination came from the searing glow of the antenna spire and the red glare of his wrist display. David had achieved the first step. He had forced the system to use its ultimate defensive measure, the blackout protocol, to suppress a single man's defiance. He checked the upload status. Transfer rate, too slow. Time required, 40 seconds. Drone arrival, 60 seconds. He could not wait. The spire was about to melt. He made a terrible choice. He channeled the full, remaining power from the destroyed drone's reactor core directly into the spire, ignoring the safety buffers built into his interface tool. A blinding flash erupted. The spire became incandescent, its material instantly vaporizing under the concentrated energy. The upload was forced through. Upload complete. Spire disintegration imminent. The defiance pulse was delivered. David had left his signature. Then, the final, inevitable consequence. The massive, localized energy surge triggered the ultimate failsafe in his personal compliance implant. The system's last command was a definitive, non-negotiable rejection of the anomaly. David felt a sudden, sharp pressure at the base of his skull, a physical jolt that stole his breath and consciousness. His wrist display went dark. His body went rigid, then collapsed onto the cold metal deck. The shutdown was silent, absolute, and immediate. The new drone arrived 60 seconds later, its sensors registering the silent, inactive platform and the single, unmoving organic unit beside the fragmented remains of the antenna. The non-compliant signature was uploaded, but the man who sent it was gone. The system's logic remained unbroken: zero quota. Zero life. The story of David ended not with a bang, but with a total, systematic silence. The only thing left to reflect on was the cold, perfect victory of the machine over the motivation of the heart.